back to this. So Daniel is this four individuals who are struggling to remain faithful or to remain in their identity as people of God. They're living in a culture that wasn't just different from them, it was actually oppressive towards them. In category after category, it was a culture that contradicted the values and it contradicted the ways of God. And not only that, these individuals, with their faith and with their beliefs and with the values that were the outcomes of those things that they believed, those things made them a minority. They were the few among the many. Everybody's going one way. Everybody's thinking one thing. Everybody's believing these things. Everybody's sharing these values except for them. And here's what we see, and here is why this is so relevant to our lives, I believe, because here they are, and they are not removed from the culture. They're not sheltered from the culture. They're embedded in the culture. And so the struggle that they are having is the exact same struggle that you and I have to discover what it looks like to live as Jesus people in a culture that could care less about that. In fact, we live this out in a culture that sometimes wishes that we wouldn't try to live like Jesus people. And so I love this story because maybe you're in technology, maybe you're in biology, maybe you're in sales, maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're a student, maybe you're retired, maybe you own your own business, like whatever category of your life you're in. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. If you are a person who is passionate about following Jesus, if you've decided to be a Jesus person in this culture and follow the Jesus way, you are not the majority. You're the minority, and the things that you believe and the things that God's calling to you, they are the minority opinion in our culture today. And so the question is, how do I live, or how do you live in a culture like this one as a person who knows and loves and follows Jesus? How do we actually do this? Now, we always also are open to this idea that when we gather here, I know not everybody has made the decision to be a Jesus follower. I know not everyone that's here today, you haven't gone all in yet on this. And I know that sometimes you sit and you go, well, is this series just another form of religious moralism? Is this whole idea of be different from culture and live out these values, is this just another like dressed up version of old time religion? Is that what this is? Just, everybody dot your I's and cross your T's and do these things and just be good and keep your nose clean. Is that what this is? Are we being a bit prudish? I don't know why, but this week a couple of stories popped up in my news feed on my iPhone that were pretty tragic. And I think one of the reasons they caught my attention is I have a college-age daughter right now who keeps taking all these trips to crazy places and taking selfies in crazy places. And so I saw these articles pop up this week, a couple of them very fresh, individuals who are in some national park or they're in some beautiful place, and there's clearly a guardrail or a boundary or some sort of signage that says don't go beyond this point, but in the effort to get the perfect selfie, they go beyond the point they're being warned to, and they take this picture. They want this perfect view. They take this picture, and something happens that they never imagined, right? It would never happen to me. I'm sure-footed. This would never take place. And then somehow they lose their footing and they fall and they lose their life over a picture. Anybody see these stories recently? And we all say, well, this is crazy, right? This doesn't make any sense at all. Like, that does not add up. And then it happens again and again and again. Like, how do people keep doing this? How does this keep happening? I keep telling my daughter, don't do this, right? But in a strange way, I realize that this is an odd indictment of our culture, which repeats this same pattern in other forms or in other categories every single day. Our culture beckons us to the edge every single day. It beckons us to the edge financially. It says you need to spend more, you need to own more, you need to have more, you go into debt. It doesn't matter as long as you can make the payment. Like our culture does this to us. It does this to us romantically. You need to feel these feelings out all the time. There needs to be this extreme sense of passion and love, and you've got to be on the edge of romance. You've got to be on the edge of sexuality. It does this with food. It does this with entertainment. It beckons us to the edge, and it tells us if you just go a little bit further, come out to the edge, life is just a little bit better out here. It's just a little bit more rich. It's a little bit more fun. Culture baits us to come to the edge. But then one slip in any one of the categories where it's led us out to the edge, and the same culture that leads us to the edge condemns us when we fall off. You slip and fall, and you make a mistake financially, and all of a sudden our culture goes, how in the world did you do that? Aren't you wise enough with your money? Like, how did you get into this mess? And we say, you did this to me, right? You follow sexual ideals to their extreme and you become a deviant, and culture says, well, now you're a deviant. How could you possibly think this way? Or romance, you break up relationship after relationship and you chase these different things and you have all of this damage and wreckage, and culture goes, how are you such a mess? And you keep looking at culture saying, you're the one that got me here. You lured me to the edge. See, culture does this. It does this with money. It does this with marriage. It does this with romance. It does this with sex. It does this with food, which I hate. It does this with entertainment and pleasure. The list goes on. It pulls us to the edge, and then when we slip, it condemns us. It chews us up, and it spits us out. This is the way of Babylon. If you're here last week, you know that Babylon loves you as long as it can use you, and then it kicks you to the curb. So are we simply advocating in this series for some sort of prudish religious moralism? Let's go back to the 1950s standard of morality. Is that what this is about? No. We are contending for something completely different. We are contending for a life that is not defined by or consumed by our culture, but rather one that is animated by faith and is activated in love. That is what we are contending for in this series, that we would be different kind of people who are animated by our faith and we are active in our love. And while it may not be popular, we may not fit in, and there might be some times where there's some ways where we just look a little bit different, we believe we have a God who is with us and with us for a reason. Amen? This week I ran across a powerful quote in a very interesting place. It applied to my heart for you as we move through this series, and specifically today. The American philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson said this. He said, "It is the office of a true teacher to show us that God is, not was, that he speaks, not spoke." That's my hope for this morning, that we will see that God is not something we read about in the past in the pages of an ancient book, but that God is present with us, that we will hear God speak to us as we move through this, that it won't just be the words he spoke in days gone by, but that we will experience his voice in the present. So if you would, open your Bible to Daniel chapter 3. If you don't have a Bible, the words will be on the screen this morning, but we're going to pick up where we left off last week, the end of chapter 2, and we're going to allow this story like a transparency of sorts. Those of us that are old enough in the room to remember what a transparency is. Some of you can ask someone older what that is, but we're just letting this story lay over our lives. We're letting this thing lay over our lives, and it's just showing us some things. It's revealing some things to us about who we are. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 starts this way. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar, who last week bowed down and worshipped the God of Daniel. This week, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up, and the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages." Notice there's a plurality here. There are lots of different languages, lots of different nations represented. There's this plurality, there's a pluralism, there's a polytheism present. He says this, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the sound of the pipe, the lyre, the trigon — I have no idea what the trigon is, but I'm looking forward to hearing one — the harp, the bagpipe — the Irish are everywhere — and every kind of music, it's true, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Now I love verse 7. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the people, the nation, the languages, fell down and worshiped the golden image that the King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, what in the world is happening here? What is this image or statue that Nebuchadnezzar has built? You'll notice as we read this that there aren't a lot of details around it. Its size is described, but we aren't given a name. We aren't given much more of a description than that. In fact, you might assume it's one of the Babylonian gods that is being set up to worship. But if you read a little bit further, even though we're not told, there's a hint that's given, and I'll just reveal this now. A little later, we read more about this, and it seems that what this image represented was not just one Babylonian god, but the Babylonian gods, the pantheon of Babylonian gods, and not just the Babylonian gods, but the Babylonian culture, the Babylonian way of life. It was like this testament to all that it meant to be Babylonian. And so here's the catch. Nebuchadnezzar builds this, but he understands this is a pluralistic, polytheistic culture. And there are people from lots of different lands and lots of different cultures and lots of different languages. And what he actually is saying is this, and we know this to be true based on history. He's saying, I'm not asking you to worship my gods instead of your gods. I'm asking that you would worship my gods in addition to your gods. Like, you can worship whatever gods you want. Like, you can do whatever you want. But in public, I want you to bow down to the image. Do what you want, but don't allow the worship of your gods to interfere with worshiping the gods or the culture of Babylon. In other words, what he's saying is, I want you to privatize your faith. I want you to privatize your faith. Behind closed doors, you do as you please. You, in your house, you do what you want with your family. But out here in public, you need to live like everyone else and spend like everyone else and think like everyone else. The values, the behaviors, the likes, the dislikes. What he's saying is, I want you to be Babylonian. Be Babylonian. So you can do what you want, but when you're in public, do this. See, he wants them to unify. He wants them to testify to the Babylonian way of life. He's trying to create this new norm within the culture. And I truly believe Nebuchadnezzar shows incredible moments of brilliance, and I think this is one of them. I think he understood that the issue at hand was not whether or not people would worship. The issue is what or who you will worship. Because everybody worships something, don't they? We all worship something. We all worship someone or something. Everyone has a God. I know you say, well, wait a second, I've got a friend, or maybe it's you, and you say, I don't really believe in this God. I don't really worship. I don't understand what that means. Whether you call it worship or not, whether you call it a God or not, everyone puts someone or something first in their life. It can be power. It can be success. It can be notoriety. It can be your career. It can be a cause. It can be your kids. It can be being loved. You can put all these sorts of things in your life. And the point is this: for every single one of us, there must be something in everyone's life that functions as a source of meaning. There's something that all of us try to grab onto that says, this is where I'm finding meaning. Or maybe it's just for a week, or maybe it's just for a month, or maybe it's just for a season. But all of us latch onto things as a source of strength. Something that motivates you, something that gets you through, something that gives you purpose for whatever it is that you're doing. Now, whether you call it a God or not is up to you. But what you're doing is worship. And there is no lack of worship in our culture today, is there? I mean, absence of worship is not an issue in our culture today. It's not an issue in our society. Everyone is worshiping someone or something. And I think Nebuchadnezzar knew that this was the case, and he wanted the empire, he wanted Babylon to be the defining force behind what everybody was worshiping. And so he builds the statue and he says, when the band breaks out, you bow down and you show your allegiance to the gods of Babylon, the values of Babylon. And so we read on in verse 8. It says, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who, and you kind of know where this is going, who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. Notice this is actually a falsehood, right? They pay no attention to you. They paint this picture. They have total disregard for you. They hate you. They're not listening to you because they're different than us. They say they do not serve the gods or worship the golden image that you have not set up. See, because they're not doing this, they are totally disregarding you in every single category. So we have this problem. These three men won't bow down. Now, who are these guys? I think this is really important for us to understand that these are not some religious fanatics who are living off in a commune someplace, right? They haven't been protected in some sort of religious bubble. These men have received a Babylonian education. They have powerful Babylonian jobs. They're involved in Babylonian culture. They're engaged in the cultural, economic activity of Babylon. These are individuals who have moved in and loved the city, and they've cared for its institution, and they've done the things that God wanted them to do. But they are also men who, in the middle of engaging in all of these different ways and working these jobs and being part of culture, they also are men who said, we are going to retain our identity and our faith as the people of God. And now they're being asked this question: will you bow? Will you bow? Will you bow to fit in? Will you bow to fit in and just make life easier for you and your family? Will you bow because that's the more comfortable thing to do? Will you bow because even though I don't really believe this, I'm just going to do it because I want to avoid the mess and the hassle? Or will you bow because there's actually a little part of this Babylonian life that you kind of like every now and then, every few days, it's fun to dip your toe in the Babylonian culture and you kind of like it, and so I don't mind bowing just a little bit. Will you bow? See, it's not just a question for them, it's also a question for anyone who's a minority influence in culture. Will you bow? Will you bow? I think another way to think about this is to answer this or ask this in a different way, and that's, what drives you? As a person, what drives you? What motivates you? What has the affection of your heart? What compels you? When you wake up in the morning and you're laying in bed and you haven't even put your feet on the floor, what's the first thing that comes to mind? When you go to bed at night and you're dreaming about your life and what's going to happen in the days ahead, what is it that you keep thinking about? What do you sacrifice for? What do you work for? What do you live for? I would present to you that whatever those things are your gods. And we worship them. And I think there's a struggle at work. I know there's a struggle at work in my own heart. I think there's a struggle at work in all of our hearts between the true God and these lesser gods that are vying for our attention, that are begging us to bow down to them. We've enthroned these things over our lives. We're letting them rule different aspects and different dynamics. And there's this tension that we're existing. And the question is, who's winning the struggle? Which gods are ruling our lives? What are we bowing down to? See, these men, they're fully engaged in culture and they're active in their city. They're not weird. They're just people who are living out their lives. They've probably built homes. They've planted gardens. They're having children. They're living life as normal, everyday citizens. But when they're asked to privatize their faith, when they're asked to worship other gods, when they're told to put other things in front of God, they refuse. And what this means is that they were clear about what it meant to be this person in culture. They wrestled with the lines. They'd thought about this. They'd stepped outside of culture, and they thought about the boundaries. And they looked at the way they were living, and they said, we're not just going to go along with the flow, and we're not going to let culture define us. Like where? Let's think for a moment about the place and the time and the era in which we live, and what are the things that we can engage in and bring life and hope to in the name of God, and what are those things that will cause us to compromise? They thought about those things, and they drew lines around those things, and they knew when they were going to give their no. And they would not bow. And so we read on. Verse 13, it says, Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. And so they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? I love this. Is it true? Like, in some sense, he's going to be fair in a furious rage sort of way. Some of you parents know what this is like, right? Like, I am really mad, but I'm going to try to be fair and just right now. But it's tough for me. He's like, is this true? But the other reason I love this, he's saying, is this true? Why is he saying, is this true? Well, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been living in a way that this is a surprise to Nebuchadnezzar. Not in a bad way, but in a very positive way. They'd been working their jobs faithfully. They'd been working up the political ladder. They'd been contributing to culture. They were his neighbors. They were friends. They were co-workers. And it's like this moment arises when he hears this, and he goes, wait a second, you guys have been living right alongside of me. Is this true? So he's going to give him a second chance. He's going to give him a second chance. And he says this. He says, now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of, guess what? The horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I've made, well and good. Like, I'm going to give you a second chance, and if you bow, that is good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Now, this question that he asks right here is rhetorical in nature. He's not asking it because he's actually curious, right? He's saying, there is not a God in heaven that can rescue you from my hands. Interestingly enough, he's going to get an answer to a rhetorical question. But this question's a powerful one. It's powerful because this is the question that I think you and I ask. When we find ourselves caught in the tension and the struggle of who am I going to bow down to, this is the question we ask. Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Like, God, is there a God? Like, I know he's not really asking, but we ask this question, right? When there's a compromise at work and we're being asked to compromise our values because we've got to pay the bills and we've got to make the paycheck, or when there's a compromise at school, there's a compromise in our relationship with someone, when there's a compromise in any part of our life and we start feeling like we're backed into a corner and our heart starts pumping and we know we're about to cross a line, we know we're about to make a decision that we shouldn't make, but there's all these other tensions that are weighing on us, there's all these other things and there's implications. There are these moments when we think to ourselves, God, are you big enough to get me out of this? Is there a God who's big enough to get me out of this? When my culture has pinned me down and I've got mortgages and college and I got crazy relationships and I got desires that my culture's put in me and I get backed into the corner, is there a God big enough to get me out of this moment? The question becomes, is there a God big enough to get me through this? Will his promises ring true? Will this really turn out for good? Can I go against the flow of culture? Can I go against the flow of my emotions and the pressures of society and know that I'm going to make it? This whole thing reminds me of a moment when I was in junior high. I tried to keep really quiet in junior high, fly beneath the radar, because if you didn't, you got beat up. Anybody remember that? And so there was this one kid that I rode the bus with, and he just tended to be the guy that beat people up. Some of you were that person. Don't raise your hand. We don't want to know. You're forgiven. But I remember this kid, I just avoided him every single day, sat in the back of the bus and thought, I don't want him to know who I am, where I live, just nothing. And I remember I would just sit quiet, and there was this one particular day where he was doing something to somebody else on the bus. I don't even remember what it was. I just remember that there was this justice thing that started rising up inside of me, and me being fairly good with words, I said something fairly sarcastic and cutting and confronted him, and I'll never forget him looking back at me in the bus and just pointing at me with this angry Nebuchadnezzar face. I remember that moment. I got off the bus and I tried to slip past and go around. I went to my locker a different way, and I'm like, I just got to avoid him. And then I went to my locker bay, which was like a giant cage because junior hires should be caged. And so I went to my locker bay and I'm like sneaking over there, and I go to my locker. I'm like, I'm just about to make it. And I turn around and he's just standing there, and we are toe to toe. That's what this moment feels like for me. And by the way, doesn't it feel like life is just a series of junior high moments over and over and over again? Some of you junior hires, let me just tell you the bad news is, you're going to do this like 7 times. This is like a little more complicated. The names are different, but junior high just keeps getting repeated over and over again, right? So we read on, verse 16 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego backed into a corner, going toe-to-toe with Nebuchadnezzar. They answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. And then they say something that nobody ever says. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. I think this is one of the most powerful statements in the entire text. We don't need to serve your image. We don't need to answer you on this because God will deliver us. And then they drop this line, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. But if not. But if God does not save us, our faith is bigger than even that. Do you see this? They are so comfortable with not knowing the outcome. They have so much faith. It's one thing to have faith that God's going to get you out of the jam, that he's going to rescue you, that he's going to deliver you. It is another thing completely to trust God even if he doesn't get you out of the jam. Do you see this? Like, this is a completely different layer. Like, these guys have leveled up, right? This is a completely different level of faith than the faith that most of us are used to. Like, I'll just be honest, most of the time I trust God to come through in the way I want him to come through. Like, I trust God as long as things will work out. And my idea of belief, and a lot of our idea of belief, is more like wishing, not trust. We wish he'll come through. But these guys have this level of faith that reveals exactly how they were able to navigate all the complexities of the culture that they lived in. They had a faith. Like, my God has been here before your kingdom was ever established, and he's going to be here long after you're gone, and whatever he's doing is bigger than what you're doing. And so we will trust him. Our God is big, and he is free, and he is wild. And even in his wildness and unpredictability, we are going to trust him more than we're going to trust you. We're going to trust this God even more than we trust the culture and the kingdom that is around us. I think they recognize something that many of us completely miss when it comes to the ebb and flow of our culture. I just want you to make sure you get this. They understood that compromise does not erase the tension, it only weakens our resolve. When you and I compromise, it does not remove the tension. It is not the ultimate pressure release valve. All compromise does is increase the tension. We think, if I just give in, if I just bow this one time, is it really that big of a deal? I'll make up for it later. Or if I just give into this temptation, it'll go away and it won't revisit me. I'll just take care of this now and it'll be gone. If I give in, I won't have this pressure. These guys knew better than that. They knew that compromise does not erase the tension that we are living in. It only weakens our resolve. So let me ask you this. Does your trust of God extend beyond the outcomes that you desire for your life? Do you trust God even if things don't work out the way you expect them to work out? Do you trust that he's bigger? Like they say, we think God is going to deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we trust God enough that he must be doing something bigger than we ever imagined. And so we read this, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Many children have seen that expression in the face of their moms. There's a change in the way you're looking at me right now. And he ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning furnace. Because the king's order was so urgent, the furnace overheated. The flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. They are thrown down. They don't bow down before a statue, but they are thrown into these flames. The political and religious powers that be have sought to destroy them, and now they have thrown them down. By the way, if this is not a foreshadowing of how Jesus would endure the cross, I don't know what is. The political and religious powers of Jesus' day, they rise up against him and they draw him, throw him towards destruction. And it looked like it was the end. And just like the story of the cross, when evil just begins to do its victory dance on everything that is good and godly, our God turns everything upside down for his glory and his good. And there is this beautiful reversal. And it's almost as if God says, take my best and throw anything at them, or take my best and throw them into anything, and just watch what I can do. Next verse, verse 24 says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste, and he declared to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? And they answered and said to the king, True, O king. And he answered and said, But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Now, there's all sorts of debate about what's going on here, and people speculating who it is that we're seeing. Is it an angel? Is it the pre-incarnate Christ? Who is this person? Whoever this person is, their presence is the reason that they're not harmed. Are you with me on this? Because it's very clear in this story that whoever this 4th person is, no matter who you want to say that it is, it's the presence of this person that keeps them from being harmed. And this person is representative of God's presence. God is present. And there is something about God being present. There's something about God being present in this moment. Are you with me? It changes things. Let me just tell you this, that I sense us growing in a particular area as a community of faith these days. And it's in our love of the presence of God. I notice it with our staff. I notice it with our council and with our elders. I notice it in my conversations with you. We love the presence of God when God is moving and when God is working, when whatever is happening around us is clearly not the result of the dreams of men or the efforts of men. There is something that thrills us in that when we say God is working and God is moving. There's something about the presence of God that ignites a fire inside of us and it excites us, which, by the way, if you're here and you're like, man, what is Summit about? Let me just tell you that we want people to experience God's presence, to hear his voice, to experience these things. Why? Because God's presence, as evidenced in this text, delivers us. The presence of God changes us. It heals us. It brings wisdom. It brings peace. It brings purpose. The presence of God brings joy, and it brings love, and it makes us generous people. The presence of God changes us. When God moves in the here and now, there's something that happens. When we invite him to move in our circumstances, when we've been backed into the corner, or it's a total mess all around us, when we invite him into these moments, we experience things and see things that can only be explained by God is doing something. And we'll say stuff, people will come to us and they'll say, how do you explain your life? How did you get out of that? How did you ever end up here? How did you turn your story around? How did you stand in that moment? People ask you questions and you will say things like, well, did you happen to see the fourth person standing with me in the fire? See, this would not be happening if it was not for God. And when things looked like they were headed to their very worst, God's presence was made known and a new path and a new road emerged. Can I just tell you right now, I'm hearing stories of so many people across our congregations that are saying to me, God is just moving in my life. God is doing things in my life. He's showing up in ways that I never imagined. And by the way, many of those circumstances are furnace-type scenarios. And 201, if you ask them, would you stand again knowing what you're going through as a result of it? Would you stand again? And they say, if it means experiencing the presence of God, there is no doubt. Verse 26 says, then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over their bodies of those men. The hair of their head was not singed, their cloaks not harmed, no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Listen, do you hear him honoring them? And then he goes on, verse 29, this is what kings do. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid to ruins, for there's no other God who's able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Remember that rhetorical question that he asked earlier? Who is the God that can deliver you from my hand? Who is the God who's bigger than the forces of culture? And now he answers, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. See, when you and I get on the other side of a story like this one, it does something to both our faith and our influence. It grows. Our faith grows. Does it not? When you get on the other side of a circumstance like this, does your faith not grow? Your faith grows and your influence grows. So I don't know what the corner of culture is that you're wrestling with right now. I don't know if it's something that you're dealing with at work. I don't know if it's something you're dealing with in your relationships. I don't know if it's a financial thing, if it's an emotional thing, if it's an addiction thing. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it is. But I do know this. There is a God who will be with you in the middle of it. Amen? And it is the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He has been here before. And whatever it is you're going through, it is not God's first rodeo. You got that? He's been here before. So would you stand with me? May you be men and women who are bold enough to draw lines that you will not cross, to establish boundaries that you will not break. May you make the decision in your hearts to not bow to culture. And may you experience the presence of God as he brings you through moments that feel like a fiery furnace. Amen? Amen. Love you guys so much. Next week, Daniel chapter 4. We'll see you then. More crazy stuff in this crazy book. See you next Sunday.